midnight screams.
First, all names in this account have been changed. I won't be giving mine, and have altered the names of everyone involved to protect their families from harassment, speculation, and whatever else might come from this getting out. Second, and this part is important, do not come looking for me. I'm not lost. I don't need to be found. I'm serious. I don't care who you are, law enforcement, search and rescue, curious hiker, journalist. Stay away from these woods. Consider it a warning, not a breadcrumb trail. I've been a volunteer with search and rescue for about 5 years now. In that time, I've had the honor of finding 4 lost souls, most of them just people who wandered off trail and got turned around in the woods. But this case was different. The missing person, Kevin, was 14 years old. He'd gone hiking with his father 3 weeks ago, a 4-day trip through the backcountry. When they didn't return after 6 days, his mother reported them missing. It only took 2 days to find their camp, or what was left of it. The tent was shredded, blood everywhere, bits of hair and bone scattered among the leaves. We found the dad not too far from camp. Both arms, one leg, and face were gone. They appeared to have been chewed off. Stomach ripped open with swarms of tiny white maggots feeding on his insides, but no sign of the child. We'd been combing these woods ever since, and every day that passed made it harder to believe we'd find the boy alive. Today had been no different. We'd been hiking since 7 a.m., our legs burning, eyes scanning everywhere for a hint of movement. My search partner, Charles, chewed absently on a protein bar as we went, crumbs falling into the brush. By the time the sun began to dip past the tree line, it was close to 5 p.m. and still no sign of the boy. "I really don't think we're going to find this kid," mumbled Charles, his voice muffled by the protein bar still in his mouth. "And if we do, it'll be a corpse." "Then we bring back his corpse," I snapped. "Or maybe you'd rather tell his mother, who just lost her husband, you got too tired to keep looking for her son." Charles glared at me, but didn't answer. "You volunteered for this! For fuck's sake!" I added, ending the argument. "I know," he muttered after a moment. "I'm just tired, man." "Yeah," I sighed. "Me too." For a while, the only sounds were our boots crunching through underbrush and the occasional crack of a branch. Then a sharp electronic chirp broke the silence Charles's satellite phone. He dug it out of his vest pocket, flipped it open, and swallowed the rest of his bar before speaking. "Charles with Search Team 3. Go ahead." "Yeah. No. Still no sign of him. We're probably about 6 hours out from the vehicles." "Copy that." He clicked it off and slipped it back into his pocket with a groan and shook his head. "The other teams aren't reporting anything either," Charles grumbled. "Another bust. Let's look for another hour or so, then head back," I told him. "Maybe we'll get lucky." I liked Charles, don't get me wrong, but his constant complaining was starting to grate on me. He was a big guy, about 6'3", broad shoulders and thick arms. Definitely handy if we ran into a bear. Him and I had gone out in search and rescue missions before. He was a good guy. Still, even though I'd been doing this for 3 years longer than him, somehow he was the one who was assigned the satellite phone. The next hour passed in tense silence. The only sound was soft birdsong drifting down from above, the crunch of boots on dead leaves, and the occasional hiss of wind through the woods. Every so often, Charles would check his compass or glance at the GPS, "Let's stop for a bit," he finally said, lowering his pack onto a fallen log. "My legs are about to give out." I didn't argue. I dropped my own pack beside him and sat down, stretching my aching knees. The forest around us was unnervingly still, that kind of heavy quiet where you almost feel something watching you. Charles dug through his pack, moving aside a mess of gear until he pulled out a water bottle. Among the jumble, one thing caught my eye: the bright orange barrel of a flare gun. "Since when did you get a flare gun?" I asked. "Since a week ago," he said, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Figured it might come in handy." He handed me the bottle, and I took a long drink. We sat there for a couple of minutes, recharging our energy. Charles ate another protein bar, while I absent-mindedly sharpened a stick with my pocket knife. I suddenly became aware that the woods had gone dead silent. The usual background hum of wind and insects had vanished, leaving only the crunching of Charles chewing. If not for that, I might have thought I'd gone deaf. That's when I heard a faint rustle from somewhere behind us. I froze mid-motion. Charles noticed it too. We both turned toward the sound, scanning the tree line, eyes darting between the narrow trunks. The silence stretched thin, every second feeling longer than the last. Then, from the shadows between the pines, someone staggered out into view. It was a boy, filthy, clothes torn, face pale, and streaked with dirt. He stood there blinking at us, swaying slightly on his feet. "Jesus Christ," Charles breathed, already standing. "Kevin?" The boy's lips moved, but no sound came out. He just stared at us, his eyes wide and glassy, like he was half asleep or half dead. We rushed toward him, but slowed as soon as we got a better look. I thought back to the photo we were given. I'd studied it for hours, memorizing every detail until it was burned into my mind. Kevin was supposed to be a little pudgy, with shoulder-length brown hair and big, soft brown eyes. The thing standing in front of us barely resembled him at all. He was rail-thin, skin stretched tight over bone, his clothes hanging off him like they belonged to someone else. His head was completely bald, no eyebrows, no stubble, just pale, raw-looking skin. But those eyes, those brown eyes, were unmistakable. "Please," he croaked, voice weak, barely audible. "I'm lost." Hey, it's okay, buddy," Charles said, dropping his pack and rummaging through it. "You're safe now. We've been looking for you for weeks. You must be starving." Kevin nodded, reaching out his trembling hands to take the cookie and Gatorade bottle Charles offered. He tore open the wrapper clumsily, snapping off a small piece and dropping it into his mouth. Almost immediately, he began to cough a deep, raw sound that shook his whole body. He doubled over, hacking and wheezing, his thin shoulders jerking violently. Hey, easy," I said, stepping closer. "You okay, kid?" Kevin spat into the dirt. When he looked up, tears rimmed his wide brown eyes. "It burns," he croaked. "What does?" Charles asked. "The cookie?" Kevin nodded weakly. "Everything I eat hurts," he whispered, voice breaking. "But I'm so hungry." He stared down at the half-eaten cookie in his palm as if fighting an invisible urge. His stomach growled loudly, and before either of us could stop him, he shoved the rest of the cookie into his mouth and swallowed hard, shuddering as he did. Charles and I exchanged a glance. Something was very wrong here. While Charles was calling dispatch to relay the good news, I sat with Kevin and asked him a few questions. What happened to you at the camp? The boy was staring into space, eyes unfocused. I don't know. It was dark, and everything happened so fast. Something pulled me out of the tent at night and bit me. Bit you? I said, eyebrows raised. Where? Kevin pulled down his shirt, revealing the wound. The bite was massive. Flesh along his shoulder had been torn open in a jagged crescent. The skin around it was bruised, with the edges already swollen and slick with dried blood. You could clearly see where upper and lower jaws had clamped down punctures spaced far apart, each one big enough to fit a thumb inside, and it stank faintly of rot and iron. Despite the horrific brutality of it, the bite looked old, like it had happened years ago. Holy crap, I muttered, my voice barely more than a whisper. That's a brutal bite. A bear? Kevin shrugged, his small shoulders trembling. I didn't see it. It was pitch black out. My dad knocked it off me, told me to run. So I ran. I ran and ran until I tripped on something. Then I was all alone in the dark. His voice cracked, and I could see tears streaking the grime on his face. I put a hand on his back, trying to ground him. It's okay, Kevin. We're getting you home. Have you found my dad? I hesitated for a moment, not sure if I should tell him about the mauled and partially devoured body found near his camp. I didn't want to send him into shock. It could kill him. No, I lied. But we'll find him too, I said with a nervous, uneasy smile. Hesitantly, wanting to change the subject, I asked, What happened to your hair? It fell out, he said flatly, almost like he didn't even recognize how strange it sounded. Like my teeth. He opened his mouth, and I froze. Only 6 jagged teeth remained, unevenly scattered across pale, bleeding gums. His skull seemed almost too thin beneath his skin, his eyes wide and hollow, and what should have been a face of a boy looked more like a fragment of something undead. A low, guttural cough shook his small frame as he closed his mouth. Charles joined us again, frown on, his face. We have a problem, Charles said, rubbing his neck. We won't get a chopper out until morning. Apparently, they're all tied up with other rescues. Of course, I groaned, rolling my eyes. So, what's the plan then? Charles glanced at the GPS. There's an old cabin about 20 minutes walk from here. We could crash there for the night and wait until morning. I nodded in agreement, then turned to Kevin. You up for a little more hiking? The boy managed a weak, toothless grin, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but also a flicker of determination. As we moved through the woods, I couldn't help but notice something unsettling. The forest was completely silent. Normally, the trails were alive with the chirping of birds and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But with Kevin in tow, the world seemed to hold its breath silent, watchful, as if forest itself was wary of him. After what felt like an eternity of trudging through mud and tangled roots, we finally came to a small clearing and spotted the cabin. The wood was gray and rotting, warped from years of neglect, and the roof sagged unevenly. Moss crept up the walls, and vines snaked through cracks in the timber. The windows were filthy, letting in thin slivers of fading light. The porch groaned under our weight as we stepped onto it, loose boards threatening to snap. A faint smell of damp wood and mildew wafted out as we opened the door. and the inside was barely larger than a single room. Dust motes swirled in the air, and cobwebs hung from the low ceiling. A single, rickety table leaned precariously in the corner, and an old stove stood cold against one wall, a fire poker resting against it, both rusted and unused for decades. It wasn't much, but it would do for a night if it didn't fall apart around us first. We pulled up a couple of rickety stools and sat at the leaning table, opening a few cans of beans. For a small dinner, Kevin ate slowly, each spoonful a struggle, his body trembling with every bite. Occasionally, a mouthful would set off a coughing fit that had him doubled over, hacking and sputtering, but he kept going. After supper, we tried to distract ourselves with a game of cards. The cabin creaked around us, the wind rattling the windows, but inside, for a little while, it felt calm, almost normal. Kevin's eyes still carried the weight of the last few weeks, but for a moment, we laughed softly at a botched hand or a lucky draw. The world outside, with its dangers and horrors, seemed to fade, replaced by the illumination of our flashlights and the faint scent of damp wood. "Well, that was fun," Charles said, then reached into his pack and pulled out the flare gun. He spun it playfully in his hand, grinning. "All right, gentlemen, who's up for a round of Russian roulette?" We all laughed. The tension of the day slipped away for a moment, replaced by the easy absurdity of exhaustion and bad jokes. Outside, the full moon hung high, its pale light cutting through the grime-smeared window and spilling across Kevin's back. He suddenly stopped mid-laugh, and his smile melted into a blank expression. His eyes went glassy, unfocused, the kind of stare that looked straight through you. Then he pitched forward, retching violently. The first wave hit the floor with a wet splash, splattering across his cards and the worn planks of the hut. The sour stench of half-digested beans filled the cramped space almost instantly. "Ah, shit," I yelped, scooting back hard off the chair to avoid the spray. "You good, man?" Charles asked. His voice caught somewhere between concern and disgust, shuffling back with me. I think so," Kevin wheezed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Not sure why that happened. He didn't finish. His chest lurched, and another violent convulsion racked his frame. The second eruption, that was worse than the first. His remaining teeth shot free of his mouth with the bile, bouncing and scattering across the cabin's floorboards like thrown dice. Kevin gagged, then wrenched forward again. This time it wasn't beans, but a thick, dark red spray that gushed out in a pulsing arc, splattering across the cards, pulling on the already slick floor until the whole place stank of iron and bile. And then the convulsions hit. His arms snapped tight against his chest, then flailed outward, legs kicking spasmodically as though he were a puppet jerked by tangled strings. His thin body bowed unnaturally, the sound of joints straining audible even above the sickening wet choke of his throat. The vomit stopped, but the sounds didn't. Now it was a hideous, wrenching dry heave. Each one, like his body, was trying to tear itself apart from the inside. A horrible rasping cough tore up with it, dry and ragged, scraping the air raw as his body seized and bucked on the blood-slick floor. With each ragged, dry heave, something pressed further out of Kevin's toothless mouth, forcing its way into the open. Then, with a rush of dread, I realized what I was seeing. The nose and muzzle of a wolf. He gagged and retched, his chest convulsing as more of it slid free. slick with blood and mucus, glistening under the dim light in wet black flashes. At the same time, his frail frame began to swell. The vomit-soaked clothes clung for only a moment before seams split and fabric tore. The sound sharp and wet as Kevin's expanding body burst free from his restraints, while coarse, bristling hairs sprouted in patches across his once hairless back and arms, curling in thick tufts until his once wasted frame was shrouded in a wiry coat. His skin changed from pale to an unnatural shade of mottled purple, veins bulging like black cords beneath the surface. His fingers spasmed, curling and stretching as the bones lengthened, the nails splitting, thickening, and hardening into curved talons that scraped grooves into the wood beneath him. Charles shouted something, but the sound barely registered over the thunder of snapping bones, cracks echoing through the room. The boy's body no longer looked frail, no longer human. Every convulsion brought him closer to something else, something that belonged out in the silent woods we'd been walking through. Kevin's body shuddered once more, his chest heaving with ragged, unnatural breaths, each one rattling like wind through broken glass. The thing that had forced itself from his mouth, the wet, snarling muzzle of a beast, hung there, trembling as if tasting the air. His original, human jaws remained split unnaturally wide, the angles impossible for any person, the flesh around his lips stretched white and splitting. He looked at me for a moment, pleading confused horror in those big brown eyes. Saliva and blood dripped from the new, canine mouth, now extended a good 6 inches from Kevin's human one, the brow of the thing slowly becoming visible. The hound's maw was snarling as it emerged with each heave. His entire body convulsed with every inhale, ribs straining with the effort. Charles and I pressed ourselves against the cabin's wall, cowering like a pair of tiny rabbits trapped by a predator. I held my knife tightly with trembling hands. Charles wielded the fire poker with one hand and the flare gun in the other, both of us, eyes wide with horror. Kevin was blocking the only exit. We were trapped. I couldn't move, my legs nailed to the floor. Kevin's eyes had rolled back into nothing but milky whites, and yet tears still streaked down his cheeks, dripping into the gore below. It reached with its new hands and gripped Kevin's human upper and lower jaws. The sound was worse than the sight. A brittle crack snap as Kevin's skull split under the pressure of those monstrous claws, exposing his wolf-like ears. Bits of bone and flesh tore loose, flopping to the Dod's blood-slick floor with a sickening slap. It shook its head clean, much like a hound would. It stood there with its head bowed, supporting itself on its knuckles like a primate, breathing slowly, deep and steady. Charles and I pressed ourselves flat against the far wall, every muscle frozen, terror etched deep into our faces. I prayed, desperately, that it would leave through the door, vanish into the black woods outside, joining whatever other horrors roamed the nigh. Then it lifted its head to face us. Time turned to ooze. The creature before me was a grotesque fusion of human and predator, every detail twisted into something nightmarish. Its face was elongated and wolf-like, jagged fangs coated in dark congealed blood. Feral amber eyes sat deep in its skull, radiating a cold, calculating awareness. Coarse black hair sprouted unevenly across its scalp and face, framing the gaping maw with matted clumps, and its thin, cracked, purple skin stretched taut over high cheekbones. A bright red tongue came out to wet its muzzle. Its torso was emaciated yet unnaturally muscular, sinews flexing under its purple-gray, bruised skin. Dark, wiry hair ran down its spine, curling around the shoulders and arms. The arms themselves were grotesquely long, with hands that ended in elongated fingers tipped with blackened, hooked claws. Its knuckles protruded like small, jagged boulders beneath the thin skin. Its legs mirror the arms in their monstrous distortion, thin yet strong. The feet were nightmarish hybrids, high arches, thick leathery soles, elongated toes, each tipped with wicked, curved claws that had scraped and gouged the floor. Veins pulsed beneath the stretched, almost reptilian-like skin, and tufts of coarse hair sprouted along the ankles and shins, connecting to powerful, twisted thighs that seemed ready to spring at any moment. Yellow eyes fixed on us, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the stagnant air of the cabin. Every motion unnervingly predatory. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat deafening in the tense silence. Its upper lip curled back, exposing jagged, yellowed teeth that gleamed in the dim light of the flashlights. A low, guttural snarl rumbled from deep in his throat, a sound both animal and disturbingly human. Then it lunged. It zeroed in on Charles first, no doubt seeing the larger man as the greater threat. Charles swung the fire poker with all his strength, but the creature twisted just out of reach. Before he could recover, Kevin slammed into him like a linebacker, sending Charles crashing against the wall with a sickening thud. The flare gun flung from his hands, flying across the cabin space. I reacted instantly, swinging the knife with everything I had, striking the beast on its upper back. It let out a guttural, pained grunt, staggering for just a moment, but then it retaliated. Its massive claws shot out like jagged blades, raking across my chest with brutal force. The impact threw me backward, my body hitting the floor with a bone-jarring smack as pain seared through me. The beast lunged at Charles again, its massive bulk pinning him to the floor. Its jaws clamped down on his left shoulder with a sickening crunch. Charles screamed, thrashing wildly. He swung out desperately with the fire poker, striking Kevin in the ribs. A sharp, pained shriek echoed from the creature as it staggered back, but only briefly. Before he could recover, the beast struck with lightning speed. One of its enormous claws shot down, sinking deep into his upper stomach. Then, with horrifying ease, it dragged the claws toward itself, ripping open Charles's abdomen as effortlessly as unzipping a jacket. Blood sprayed across the floor as Charles cried out. The thing lifted its head toward the ceiling, letting out an ear-shattering cry. It wasn't a wolf's howl, no. It was something far darker, a sound like a person trying to imitate a wolf. Twisted and guttural, with a bass that rattled the bones. Then, without warning, it plunged its snout into Charles's open stomach, greedily slurping and tearing at his innards. I forced myself upright, every movement sending jagged pain through my ribs. No doubt some were cracked. My eyes locked onto a nearby object, the flare gun, barely a foot away. Salvation, my only chance. Slowly, agonizingly, I inched toward it. Through my peripheral vision, I saw it twist in my direction, drawn to fresh movement, its wet breathing echoing through the room as it fixed on me. My hands closed around the flare gun just as it pounced. Its jaws snapped toward me, aiming for my neck, dripping with blood. Instinct took over. I threw my arm up to protect my throat. The creature's teeth clamped down on my forearm with bone-crushing force. I felt a sharp crack echo through my arm as pain exploded up my shoulder. Panic surged, but there was no time to think, only to act. A burst of adrenaline shot through me. With my free arm, I aimed the flare gun at the creature's face and pulled the trigger. A blinding red light erupted from the barrel, the flare striking straight into its eye. It yelped, releasing my arm, and clawed desperately at its eye, trying to remove the burning projectile. Flames quickly caught, licking across its hairy face, turning the creature's head into a writhing fireball. Wails of pain echoed through the hut as it thrashed violently, massive claws slashing at the walls and floor as the flames consumed its head. Smoke filled the tiny room, stinging my eyes and making it hard to breathe. I stumbled backward, gripping the flare gun tighter, my ribs screaming with pain every time I moved. Its wails grew louder, a sickening mix of human and beast, echoing off the log walls. Sparks rained down around me as the fire spread, igniting the curtains and scraps of wood. The open doorway loomed ahead. It was now or never. I hobbled forward, each step an effort, and reached the threshold. My hand gripped the door frame, and I forced myself to glance back one last time. The hut was a hellscape. Charles was on his back, dead. Huge hole in his gut, face twisted in agony, gaze fixed on the now flaming roof. The wolf thing writhed on the floor, thrashing desperately, trying in vain to extinguish the fire that completely consumed it now. Its anguished howls echoed through the dark woods, a terrifying symphony of fury and pain. Smoke curled into the night air as I stepped out, gasping for fresh breath, the scent of burning hair, charred flesh, and popping fat lingering in the air. I only got a couple of feet from the cabin before I fell onto my side. I grunted in pain as I collapsed, rolling onto my back. The night sky stretched endlessly above me, the full moon hanging heavy and ominous, casting pale light over the burning structure. My vision blurred, pain radiating through my body, and slowly I felt myself slipping away. All that remained was the oppressive roar of flames and the eerie stillness of the forest beyond, pressing in from all sides as I succumbed to blissful unconsciousness. It was morning when I stirred awake. For a moment, disorientation clouded my mind. I didn't know where I was. Then reality hit me like a crashing wave. I moved slowly, expecting pain, but to my astonishment, there was none. My arm, where the beast had bitten me, had a good-sized scar of bite mark, similar in shape to a dog bite, but it looked almost completely healed, as if months had passed. Tentatively, I pulled up my shredded shirt and examined the deep claw marks across my chest. Even those injuries, which I remembered as raw and agonizing, but this too looked months old. A gnawing hunger gripped me, sharper and more insistent than anything I had ever felt before. My stomach churned, aching, demanding satisfaction. I hadn't realized how ravenous I truly was until now. I forced myself to my feet and surveyed the hut. The roof had collapsed in places, walls reduced to smoldering beams, the entire structure a blackened ruin. Amazingly, the fire hadn't spread to the surrounding forest. The flames had somehow consumed themselves and died out, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I moved cautiously toward the scorched remains, scanning for any sign of life. My gaze fell on something large, sprawled among the embers. Canine jaws, now completely blackened, jutted grotesquely from a twisted body contorted in the agony of death. Smoke curled around it, carrying the acrid stench of burnt flesh, making my stomach grumble with hunger. I continued surveying the ruins when my eyes fell on another figure. Charles still lay on his back, his face completely burned away, arms resting limply at his sides. I wanted to kneel, to bury him properly, to mourn my friend, but my body's gnawing hunger forced my attention elsewhere. Survival demanded that I search for food before grieving the dead. I sifted through the debris, desperate for anything to devour a morsel, a crumb, anything. I lifted a charred beam of wood, and beneath it, I spotted a backpack, the one that belonged to Charles. As I hoisted it up, the bag ripped open in the process, spilling its contents across the blackened floor: GPS, satellite phone, and a granola bar. Driven by hunger, ripped open the packaging on the food and shoved it into my mouth. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through my jaw. I yanked the bar free and stared in shock. 2 of my teeth were embedded in it. I lifted my hand to my mouth, feeling the gaping void where 2 upper teeth had been. My eyes widened, and my pulse raced uncontrollably. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to steady myself, and to my horror, a large clump came loose in my hand, tumbling to the scorched floor. Whatever Kevin had been inflicted with disease, curse, I didn't know I now felt it coursing through me. I was going to turn into a monster. My world swam. Nausea clawed at my stomach, and I bent forward, head between my knees, expecting to vomit. I evaluated my situation. I was infected. I would turn. If I got rescued, I would kill anyone, everyone. Kevin hadn't recognized us when he transformed. I doubt I would be any different. I wouldn't be able to control myself. I couldn't live with the idea of hurting anyone. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to will away the inevitability. There had to be a choice, a loophole, something I could do to survive without condemning everyone around me, but there wasn't. Not anymore. I had to die. I tried taking matters into my own hands. I found my knife buried in the ruins of the hut. I hovered it over my wrists, commanding myself to slash them open. But my body just wouldn't listen. I then thought about hanging as an option, but didn't know how to tie a noose. In the distance, I heard the steady thrum of helicopter blades cutting through the morning air, a sound that made my heart race with dread. They must have followed the smoke from the hut. I couldn't be found. I wouldn't be found. Gripping the satellite phone tight in my hands, I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush as fast as my legs would carry me deeper into the forest. Branches clawed at my arms and face. Roots caught at my boots, but I didn't stop. The sound of the helicopter faded, growing fainter with every pounding step, until it was swallowed by the vast silence of the woods. After what felt like forever, 30 minutes, maybe more, I finally stopped. My chest heaved, breath rasping in my throat, sweat slicking my skin. I could still feel the faint hum of the phone in my grip. They'd trace the signal eventually, but out here, in the deep woods, they'd never be able to land. That's when I decided to type this out on the satellite phone. The connection's garbage, and pecking it out letter by letter is agonizingly slow, but it's not like I have anything better to do. I have no doubt there will be another full moon tonight, and when it rises, I'll change just like Kevin did. What keeps gnawing at me isn't the if, but the how. Will I still be in here, reveling in the carnage I cause? Or will I be shoved into the dark, locked in the passenger seat, forced to watch through someone else's eyes as I become nothing but hunger and teeth and claws? The waiting is worse than dying. The sun is sinking behind the mountains now, dragging the light with it. Shadows creep across the trees, and with them comes the dread of inevitability. Night is coming, and with it, the change. I don't think I'll be here in the morning. The beast won't linger. It will hunt. It will wander, sniffing out fresh prey. By the time I wake again, if I wake, I'll be somewhere deep in the wilderness, covered in blood that isn't mine. Maybe, if I'm lucky, it will carry me far from anyone. Far from towns, from homes, from families. Maybe the only thing it will kill tonight is me. But I doubt I'll get that lucky. Again, I want to emphasize, do not come looking for me. I'm too dangerous now. I don't want to hurt anyone, and I don't want to be found. I'm writing this so there's a record of what happened, and as a warning to anyone who might think about searching for me. Stay away, please. If you are out here in the woods at night and you hear howling, run.